Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and something I want to talk about briefly is a pervasive myth in the fitness world, in the dieting world, and you see it on forums, books, you read articles about it, you even see YouTube channels talking about it, and it's this idea of carbs, and in particularly sugars, and even more in particularly processed sugars, being stored as body fat or converting into fat in the human body at some appreciable rate. Now, I know some people are going to try to point out when I make a statement like that, they'll say, hey, wait a minute, there was a study done somewhere on people who were morbidly obese, sedentary, and who were given several liters of soda a day to where they were converting it into body fat. When we study people who are not sedentary, obese, and insulin resistant, this doesn't really happen, and particularly in athletic populations, people who exercise, which is my target demographic, because anyone who's watching my channel trains, they work out. Anyone who doesn't work out who starts watching my channel, odds are, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that they are wanting to start working out or exercising, so they are very quickly going to fall out of the demographic that could gain half a pound of fat in a month from eating too much sugar. Because the reality is, when we study it in more healthy populations or active populations, you can overfeed people a fairly large amount of carbs. You can take their normal diet, their maintenance, you can throw another 500 or 600 calories of pure carbs, even pure sugar at them, and only a couple of grams of it are going to store as body fat. And so that's not something you're really concerned with. It really is about calories. And the reason that we say that you can still gain fat on a higher carb diet is because you're having to eat some fat. You're not going to drop your fat intake so low that you're not able to gain fat from a large calorie surplus without risking issues with your hormones potentially, without risking deficiencies in EFAs and some fat soluble vitamins. So the only people who really get away with this, potentially people on drugs, on performance enhancing drugs who do not need as much dietary fat, or people who drop their fat really low, and the little bit of fat they get is from very efficient sources like EFA supplements. So it's really not feasible for you to drop your fat ultra low without other health issues. But some people would argue that you can get away with it. I'm not going to go there today. That is a completely separate argument. But for most people, it may not be feasible. And so therefore you're eating enough fat calories to store those fat calories. And the reality is your body doesn't store carbs, it burns carbs. Your body will always burn carbs as its preferred fuel source if they're available. It will always burn some fat too. There's a mixture, but the dominant caloric burn will always be glucose. It will always be carbohydrates. And when you have surplus carbohydrates, and particularly for athletic people, you store them in muscle tissue as muscle glycogen. Now, for less athletic people, a lot of them are going to end up as liver glycogen, but if you're athletic, it's going to tend to shift in the direction of storage as muscle glycogen in muscle tissue for later fuel use, because it's really hard to get the glucose you need back out of fat. So that's going to be the way your body prefers to store it. So you tend to store carbs as carbs in the body and fat as fat in the body when your body doesn't burn them. And if you're eating a lot of carbs, it slows down fat burning because your body prefers carbs for a number of obvious reasons. So if that's what you're eating, that's what you're going to burn. And the fat you eat is going to get stored. But then, of course, people take that logic to run into low-carb diets to try to say, well, if you don't eat carbs, then you'll just burn fat. Yeah, no, you'll eat the fat you eat and you'll store the rest. So that's not always a solution either. But it's not the carbs themselves that are storing as fat. It is the fat that you are eating that you are storing as fat. And either way, a large calorie surplus will always put body fat on you. No one is arguing that. But it is a myth that carbs themselves, even highly refined ones and sugars, are somehow stored as body fat when you overeat them. They really aren't. It's a myth in that it's partially true and that very, very tiny amounts can be. It is a myth in the sense that it's a significant amount, that you could eat enough sugar in your diet for you to gain large amounts of body fat from doing so, directly through that sugar being stored and converted through de novo lipogenesis into body fat. The pathways are there and they exist, but they, under normal circumstances, they occur at such a tiny, minuscule rate that it's not something that's going to make a difference on the scale or in the mirror. So this is one of those myths that need to be shut down. It really does come down to calories in and out at the end of the day, but in terms of actual macronutrient composition, the fat that you eat is what actually gets stored as body fat. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time. But let me give you guys a bicep shot before I go.